legendary jazz musician Hugh Masekela, fondly known, of course, as Bra Hugh, has been posthumously honored at the induction ceremony in New York this week. The iconic trumpeter and composer was inducted into the Ertegun Hall of Fame at Lincoln Center for his contribution to jazz music and the impact he's been able to have on the country's cultural identity. Let's speak more about this now with Bra Hugh's nephew, Mabusa Masekela, who's live to us now in our studios this morning. Great to have you with us, sir. Thanks so much indeed for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
And it's an honor, I suppose, that hopefully will go a long way, because outside of what Bra Hugh has been able to do whilst he's alive, there's also a foundation in his name, hoping to continue with that legacy.
Yes, well, the foundation's legacy, the foundation's mission is more about culture than it is necessarily about Bra Hugh's musical legacy. It's a foundation that he established himself when he was still alive, and it was really brought about because of his concern for what he saw as like cultural depletion, I suppose we could call it, as we become more overrun by Western and westernized things, and the things of Africa and the things of our heart and the things of our soul seem to be pushed away and, pushed aside in favor of what is perceived as better things. But it definitely, I think, has a direct effect on how we are experiencing the world as it is today and now. And things like, being able to speak our mother tongues, greeting, eating pap with your hands, all these sort of things and other deeper cultural things are things that are perceived as being not important or less than. And so the purpose of the foundation is really to bring to fore our African heritage and our African traditions, as well as unearthing what may seem to be or appear to be lost.
That is such an interesting area, even of study, even for people who are, dedicated their lives to actually, as academics, exploring this. Because part of what they speak about is this idea of transculturalization, this notion that culture itself has never been static throughout time. And because of that, it's inevitably going to change. I suppose the question then becomes, to what extent does that change at some point undermine what people feel is at the core of that culture?
Well, I think for me the thing to remember is that we're all here now. There's no primitive or modern people. Whatever everybody has done, whether they be an Indian in the Amazon forest, or a San person in the desert, or a Zulu person in Soweto, whatever we've done to get here has gotten us here.
Right.
So there's nobody who can, I think, claim that people's cultural practices are backwards or, unimportant. I think that the question you pose in terms of where the authenticity lies is simply in the practice of how people do it in the present. And things do, yes, culture is always dynamic. It's always, whatever culture you're speaking of, it's always dynamic. But the important thing is that that culture is practiced. And in the practice is the change that adjusts to the circumstances of time that you may be in. But it is something that you have to actively engage in.
Right. Do you reckon there's space for that nuanced discussion within cultural groups? Because the other mistake sometimes I think is made is assuming that those are homogenous groups. Like, all the Zulus know what being Zulu looks like in Soweto, which is not always the case, right?
It's not always the case. I think that the difficulty is that, not knocking on Westerners too much, but I think Westerners, especially English, like to label things and put things in boxes and present it as static, and that is the thing and that is it. And that is simply not the case and hasn't been the case. I think that the hope is that the nuanced discussion runs along the lines of still being able to do that thing that you claim as cultural treasure, but also allowing for the fact that in any culture, what we look for is that it grows to include and nurture everybody, so that the real goal of any cultural effort is not only self-expression, but also well-being. And that if your target is that, it doesn't matter how the thing changes, because it will always be itself, but it will always empower and reinforce itself.
The idea of autonomy and being able to self-actualize is the term I'm looking for.
Yes.
So what's your response to people who point to what they say is an inherent contradiction in what we're doing, right? So you speaking about knocks on the West in some respects. I mean, the backdrop of our discussion is an honor from the West. And the academics I spoke about will also tell you that, in fact, some of the most rigorous African centers don't even lie on the continent, because Africans themselves don't seem to be interested enough in those discussions.
I think that people are people, and that's the thing to understand and appreciate. And so whatever systematic or cultural impositions may be laid upon people, the fact of the matter is that you and I are always going to be human beings at the beginning and at the base of all things. And so I think that if there's going to be claims of contradiction, I think those claims are not well-founded, because what we're actually engaging in, despite what we may be being told, what we're actually engaging in is human beings interacting with other human beings. You know, Japanese people make sushi. I don't make sushi. My sushi doesn't come from my culture, but I'm very happy that Japanese people make sushi, because I love it. You know, it tastes very good, and it's something that is unique to that cultural space, but it's something that we can all enjoy. And I think that in the nuance, what we seek is the empowerment. So if there are practices that deny agency, whatever those practices are, whatever the cultural origins of those practices are, I think those are the drawbacks. Those are the places where, at least from where I sit and from where I see, those are the spaces that we would like to see people empowered. And if the people are not being empowered, then maybe we shouldn't be engaging in that practice. But that is the only space in which I think cultural practices can be called into question in terms of their origins.
I suppose with all of that in mind, what does this kind of honor mean for the work that you do? You know, perhaps even, let me ask the question twofold. What does it mean for the family? And then as a secondary question, for the work.
Well, I think for the family and for the people who love him, it's just part of the evidence of, like, Huey's expansiveness. I mean, this was a man who appealed to so many across cultural borders and whatever people may think. I mean, just in terms of his musicianship, yes, he's being honored as a jazz musician, and I think that this is an honor that is well-founded. I also think that Huey is a jazz musician. He's a samba musician. He's a salsa musician. He's a mbaqanga musician. He's a, you know, he's got all of that ability. He had the ability to grasp the basics of any musical style and then reproduce those in an authentic and appreciative way, you know. And I think that is a big part of how Huey really transcends whatever cultural resistance or holdback that people may perceive, because he did, in fact, embrace all cultures. You know, in terms of what it means for the family and for, in terms of what it means for the foundation, well, you know, there's always this thing of when people pass away, even great musicians or great artists, that there's a next generation or another generation that's not going to see them or is not going to be interested in them. And what I find fascinating is that 5 years on, there are all kinds of accolades and honors still coming to Huey, as well as music that's still being put out. And I think that speaks to just the vitality of the man. And I think it is that vitality that the foundation will benefit from in terms of more eyes on what the projects of the foundation are.
Sure. You and I could have this discussion until the cows come home.
Absolutely.
But thanks for your indulgence. There's certainly a lot of food for thought. It's more than about the music, but certainly also about what the music in some instances communicates about us. So I appreciate your coming through, Mabusa Masekela, who is Hugh Masekela's nephew, as we take stock of what this honor in New York actually means, not only for the musician, but as I mentioned, for the work as well.